Let's do one more prospect breakdown before the lottery. Today, looking at Alabama wing and maybe the best prospect in college basketball, Brandon Miller. Where did he shine and not shine this season? How would he fit with the Pacers? We'll get to it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, diving into another prospect. We talked about Scoot Henderson last week, went Victor Wembanyama a little bit before that. Today, the last of the top three considered right now, Brandon Miller. Richard Stayman, a.k.a. Mavs Draft from our Locked On Network's Locked On NBA Big Board, is going to join us to talk about perhaps the best prospect in college basketball, his strengths, his weaknesses. We cover all the off-court stuff as well, fit with the Pacers in the last pre-lottery prospect breakdown. It's a fun conversation. This week, going to be more solo shows because I will be in Chicago Tuesday through Thursday for both the lottery and the draft combine. Hope to have some content for you guys from that in terms of stuff about the Pacers, how they did in the lottery and stuff like that. Tomorrow, talking about the lottery preview, everything you need to know ahead of the drawing. So lots of great stuff coming for you everydayers. But today, we'll talk about Brandon Miller. Let's get right to it. Some Pacers fans' favorite prospect, a very good prospect in this draft. It's Brandon Miller, the Alabama wing. Richard Stayman is here to talk about it from our NBA Draft Locked On podcast that has changed names so many times. But still, this is a fun draft and a great player in Brandon Miller. Richard, what do you think of him high level as a player?
I think he's the ideal forward that you could have. If you already have a top guy in place, you already have that building block, that core piece to your rotation, to your franchise's future, I think he's one of the best complementary pieces you can find. He shoots, he's 6'9", he defends, and he has creation ability, and he knows what he's doing on the court. He's not going to make dumb mistakes. Like, even when he's not scoring, he's still impacting the game. He had a couple of those games this year, and he's just a high-level player. At the minimum, he's one of the best role players in the league. At a maximum, he's got star potential on the wings.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's really interesting to look at the way he plays at Bama because Nate Oates is very much a Maury ball guy, right? So I see a lot of, and I agree with this to an extent of just like he's only a rim and threes guy, and like yeah, kind of, but like that's kind of what Bama wants at the same time. And there's like some possessions their point guard can really handle it, so he's just spacing. So it's sometimes it feels like you don't see what he's doing, but he's helping Bama play exactly the way Alabama wanted to play, right? And so like a lot of that stuff is NBA translatable. And so even before you get into specific skills or just look at his stats, like some of the stuff that if it feels like Miller isn't Miller when you're watching the Crimson Tide, it's because of the way that Bama team and Nate Oates likes to play. And I found that to be really intriguing. Just like, oh, wow, he's really good at not only, being really good when he's got the ball and being this awesome shooter, and his space creation is great. We'll get to that. But just the way he's fitting into the way that team was playing, I think really stood out to me and kind of speaks to your point about him being a really good, at worst, complementary role player at the pro level.
Yeah, I mean, and, I think a lot of people will point to he had a terrible March. I mean, I've been one to point to it. In the month of March, he had 8 games. That includes 1 regular season game. 2 regular season games, 3 conference tournament, 3 NCAA tournament games. He averaged 15.5 points on 30% shooting, 25.8% from 3, 92% from the line is good. But, the scoring's not there, but you look at 9.3 rebounds a game, 3 assists, 1 block, 1 steal. Like, that's still great numbers. If you just, throw out the efficiency, he played hurt. I think he had a groin injury at the end of at some point in March. I don't remember where it happened, but, contextualizing, he still had the impact like that. That's just remarkable.
Yeah, really, really good player. And I think the place to start, you already mentioned it, is the 3, because a lot of what he's able to, there's 2 things on offense that really stood out to me in my limited tape watching of him so far. And one is the 3. And it's not just that he takes and makes them. Of course, that's extremely valuable when you look at someone's 3, if they take a lot of them and make them per 40, because that's what they do for college for some reason. Took over 9 threes per 40 and made 38.4% of them. But it's not that stands out to me. It's one that he's able to create his own three when he's matched up one-on-one with somebody, just like a 2-dribble move, and he's got some space. Some of that's because of his size, some of that's because of his handle. But two, is he a shoot from NBA distance regularly in the middle of a game? Like if he's 2 steps behind the line, no problem, he's taking it. Like the way he takes threes, the manner he gets them up, and the length that he has, the wingspan, he could just shoot over most guys. I think that is what's almost more valuable than the percentages that even in the NBA, he'll be able to get them up very easily.
Yeah, and I mean, sticking with the percentages before going back to the eye test stuff, I mean, just going back to synergy, I mean, on 201 catch and shoot threes, he shot 39.8%, basically 40%. And when you break that down, 35% from while being contested, that's about average. And then unguarded on open, 77 open threes, 48% from three.
Wow.
Like that's an elite number. And it really checks out when you watch him. He has a quick shot. He can shoot over defenses, like you said, because of the length and the speed of that shot. And then on dribble jump shots, off the dribble threes, it wasn't great. But for somebody who took so many shots just in general, 33% isn't bad. And also you look at college, like 33% is like the equivalent of the NBA
Yeah.
35. Like you got to scale it up and down. And when you just look at that shot, like what doesn't feel translatable about it? Like for me, there's nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
So
I love the way he shoots. Like it's so natural, and Bama's point guards kind of know that. And it's funny to see, like, I think the first Bama game I watched, the one did they play Houston, like November or December, right? Pretty early in their season. And he was a good shooter at that point, but like kind of lesser known player. And so he's left a little more open, and defenders are shagging off. And the second one I watched was Tennessee in early March. And the Tennessee's glued to him, like in the corner on the opposite wing. They're like, no, we're not letting him get open at all. And you can already see the effect his spacing has just over the growth of a college season, which I thought was pretty interesting.
yeah, I mean, he developed from like at the very beginning, he was somebody who people were like, hey, this guy's a sleeper to go in the top 10. And it turned into, hey, this guy's actually a top 5 prospect. Like the development happened very quickly. He had an absolute dud against Houston in the beginning of December.
Yeah.
He went 0 of 8, still at 8 points, 5 rebounds, 2 steals. But like it was a disaster. I was actually pretty out on him at that point. I was like, look, I get what he did against South Dakota State. He did fine against Michigan State too, but none of them were like popping games. I don't think he shot outside of against Jacksonville State. He didn't shoot above 50% on 10 plus shots at any point before that game. So I was like, man, this might've been fool's gold. What does he do to come back? I mean, he scores 24 against Memphis, 36 against Gonzaga, a few no-name games in there. Then you go to conference play, LSU 31 on 11 of 16, Vanderbilt 30 on 10 of 16. Like he just developed and really became consistent as the season went on. Like that's what you want, is these guys to get better as the season progresses.
I'm a big fan of, I've heard this before and I did this for a while, the worst game, best game, like to start on a guy. And that, when I saw that Houston game, I was like, okay, let's start here. How did this go so wrong? And then you can see the growth when you go to better games later in the season. He's not just a shooter. This is a really niche kind of skill. Like, I don't think I've brought this up for another prospect before, but I wouldn't say he's like an amazing finisher, but when he dribbles around a screen, he is so good at keeping guys on his hip. Like he's so good at some like kind of snaking, kind of not, but just like looking back and keeping guys on his hip. And that lets him get closer and closer to the rim as his drive goes on. Like Chris Paul is the best at that ever at the NBA level. Miller's really good at that, which for his size, I was like, wow, I'm not sure I recall a ton of really giant wings being good at that. Jason Tatum's really good at that size as well. And I that like it's very rare for a college prospect. I noticed that, and I put that in my notes, just like keeping guys on his hip. I'll probably post a Twitter clip of it because I have 4 different ones I want to put up. I was like, wow, that's really impressive. Even if he's not finishing them all the time, it's just the way that, like, that's a threat as a secondary pick and roll guy, or just even a get to the rim kind of attacker, that he's able to do that.
Yeah, it's a process over results thing on that
Yes.
regard. I mean, it's advanced when you look at, again, like you can count on one hand probably the amount of 6, 7 plus starters in the league that can do that as easily as he does. And on top of that, I think he's comfortable with both hands. So as he develops that skill, being able to go left or right, keeping his man on his hip, like that's going to be massive.
Yeah, and if he is a secondary guy I don't know what he'll be. It depends what team he's on, most likely. But if he's a secondary guy, and a lot of the teams in the top 5, he probably would be, that's going to be huge, right? Just to be able to do that quick weak side flip, pick and roll, go. All right, he's got an advantage. He's keeping a guy in his hip. I thought that was really interesting, especially in the context of what we talked about earlier, like the way Bama plays. Like at first you look at it, if you go to CBB Analytics and pull up a shot chart, you see a lot of blue between the 3-point line and the rim, which is frightening. But then you look at the volume and like mid-range, he took 31 on twos outside the paint the whole season. Like, okay, I don't care about the percentage if you're only taking 31 in the paint. That's a little more concerning. He took 83 of those and didn't finish them very well. When he got all the way to the rim, they went in. When he got to the foul line, he made the free throws. Like, if he's able to continue to be that kind of I can keep a guy in my hip and get to the basket player in the NBA and either draw those fouls or get to at least, what I think they do, 4.5 feet or 5 feet from the rim is the rim on CBB. Like, that's pretty close. He can get there. I think that's really going to be huge for his offensive game. Hey guys, one short little break so I can talk to you about PrizePicks. We're doing a $1 million daily Superflex promotion for the NBA playoffs. Every day of the playoffs, one PrizePicks user will win a chance to become a millionaire. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern will be randomly selected every day, and whoever placed that entry will be given a 6-pick flex with the payouts of $1 million if you get all 6 right, 80,000 if you get 5, and 16,000 if you get 4 correct. Full details at prizepicks.com/million. You got to opt in at that link to be eligible for the $1 million entry. And once you opt in, you just got to play the game like normal. You could be the lucky winner. What is PrizePicks? Pick a player and an over-under for a stat. If you're right, you win, right? Kevin Durant, more or less than 6.5 assists when he was still playing. LeBron still playing. Will he have more or less? They didn't have rebounds. That's the gist. You can pick up to 2 to 6 players. You can have 25 times your money on any entry. It's just you versus the projections. So no, not you versus another person. You can make your picks in about a minute. It's safe. It's fast withdrawals, operational over 30 states plus Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit 100, PrizePicks will give you 100. If you deposit 50, PrizePicks will give you 50. But don't forget to enter promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 because PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy.
Yeah, and I posted his shot chart in my scouting report, and I think you'll see that the number isn't great, but as you kind of dive into half court, he's inconsistent. But again, it's like these processes, what he knows what to do and executing on it, it's going to get there. And also, like in college, there's no defensive 3 in the key. Like how many times when you watch, did you see a center just sitting and going, like looking around, waiting for them to come to him, right? Like, and that's just not going to happen. Brandon Miller's going to be better at the rim because of that.
It's one of my least favorite things about the college game, especially Bama, who like Miller's so good that, I kind of skip ahead on some offensive possessions till he's catching the ball. And for Bama, that's a lot of the right arrow because their point guards just dribble a lot waiting to develop their action. It was kind of frustrating at times. You talked about the half court. He's better in transition, right? Like just because he's so fast, he's not, I wouldn't call him like explosive. I don't know what the right word to describe his athleticism is, but he's fast. And in the open floor, he's pretty heady and smart. And I think that also, one, talking about the Pacers would make him a great fit, but two, is just generally translatable to an NBA where the pace is increasing year over year.
Yeah, I mean, everything just feels translatable about him. Like I actually just went to Synergy and sorted his stuff by half court versus transition, and the numbers go up. Like again, the rim numbers actually fall off, but everything else, and again, it's stuff where like, yeah, it falls off, but again, like he knows what to do. It's stuff that he doesn't have bad touch. I think it's generally he's double teamed. He's facing these bigs that are camped out, and it's just the college nature, the slow pace, and the fast pace is going to benefit him a lot. He is better in transition right now, like in quick 10 to 15 second offense, which somehow is very quick for the college game. That's slow for the NBA, and that's where he's, how quickly he adjusts to that speed will be big. I don't think he's going to have a learning curve on it.
So there is this whole other side of the ball that we got to get to a little bit. But okay, the start of this is, even like I just said, I wouldn't say explosive, but like he's quick with his feet. He's really long. What's his wingspan? 7 foot. I've seen 7'2", 7'1", and 7 feet. Whatever. Long, longer than his height significantly. I can't wait for the combine next week just to get the official measurement on him specifically. And he stays in front of guys. Like that's kind of all you can ask for. He is thin. Like when I was reading scouting reports, someone said thin as a rail, and I didn't agree with that. I don't think he's that thin, but he's like barely 200 pounds at 6'7". So he is thin, and that definitely is not a detriment, but just like not a positive part of his defense. But he's really shifty with his feet. He can bother shots. His steal percentage is pretty good. His block percentage is fine. Like I was mostly impressed with his defense, even though there were more warts in that than his offense.
Yeah, his defense is good. I mean, he's versatile, which matters in this NBA where I think you can put him on a guard. You're not kicking yourself. We can't guard bigs, but
Not at all.
if you're just looking at a spot where he can and can't guard, I think I really don't think there's many spots. Like, he's one thing I like to factor in is what will he look like if he fills out his frame. Like, everybody gets, like, say everybody in the draft they all get the Giannis build. They all fill out their frame and they come massive, right? Not necessarily the length, but just the way Giannis is super jacked. What if everyone got that? And while Brandon Miller probably won't ever get to that level, but like, if he adds 20, 25 pounds of muscle, whatever you want to throw out as the number, like, he becomes a really good defender. He has a good motor. He has quick feet, I think quick enough at least to move on the perimeter. I just feel like with that frame, and if he gets stronger, he's not going to get beat at the point, like just that first step. Like, that's where he loses. And strength helps in stopping quick guys, right? Like, if you're able to just slow them down by just physically touching them, like, I've seen that a lot of times. I mean, that's how you beat these quicker players, is if you can't stay with them, at least bully them and make them not be quicker than you. And I think for that, Brandon Miller, if he adds strength, he's going to be a great defender.
Usually for guys that are a little faster, like, he can just hip turn and run with them. But I actually felt like he was better as a lateral foot defender than a straight up and down defender, which is really kind of unique. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's kind of how I felt when he was standing in front of guys.
You're saying, say that again with the up and down?
Like, laterally versus towards and away from the rim.
Yeah.
I feel like he's better laterally,
north,
which is rare.
North, south, east, west. Yeah. I mean, I think he's better at going east, west, but I think he can handle both. And just in general, like, being able to guard, though, it depends. Like, I think a big needs to be able to go north, south more easily than a wing, right?
Yes, I would say that.
Sorry.
If he's going to be switching, I mean, at his size and foot speed, I would assume that every team he's on is going to be like, yeah, switch, whatever. Like, you got to kind of do both. But it'll be interesting to see, like, we've kind of talked about his size. Like if he gets switched on to I don't know. I don't want to say this guy. The Pacers play the Bulls 4 times a year, so I always end up saying DeRozan. Like, I feel like if he was on DeRozan, he'd do fine. But if he was on like a Harrison Barnes, he might actually do worse with that, just because of like the power and size element, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Yeah. I hear. Yeah. Sorry. I don't know why I couldn't visualize that. I completely agree with that. I agree with that sentiment.
That's a very like random way to describe what I think of his defense. Let me pick 2 random NBA players out of a hat, and I'll tell you which ones I think he can guard better. Is there a website that just draws up random NBA players? Yeah. What do you think of his defense, like, in general? I think we've been getting into the foot speed part of this, and the impact stats say, yeah, he was a pretty good defender. He had the best BPM of any freshman. His defensive box plus minus was pretty good. But what do you just generally think of him as a defender?
Yeah, I think he puts himself in bad situations at times. He gambles a little bit too much off ball for my liking, and because of that, when his man that he's gambled on gets the ball, he's playing a step behind. I think that's a habit he has to fix. Could also just be the system at Alabama where they're like, hey, play the passing lanes a little bit hard. You never know until you really interview the guy, like, and get deep technical discussions with him, I think. But from the outsider's perspective, that's my biggest concern. And then also just that strength element again.
Yeah, the strength element is going to be a big thing for him and what he's able to do, because he might just not ever be that great of a rim finisher. And the volume at the rim is where I would, if we're going to pivot to weaknesses a little bit, like, he's a good finisher, but the volume at the rim is not that high for a guy who has some of the skills we've already talked about, where he can kind of manipulate defenses to get to the basket if he needs to. And he's kind of quick, but the rim volume's not very high at all. Like 126 on the whole season, like 3 per game, maybe. That's fine, but I think I would want a little more if I'm going to count this guy as a complimentary scorer as opposed to just a shooter. And I think he's going to be more than just a shooter, certainly. But I did think the rim volume was lower than an elite prospect typically has.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. When you look at his shot chart again, that number just goes a little bit lower than you want to see. And for him, I think that's another area where the strength may help too, where you see him kind of being able to absorb that contact, right? Be able to keep the touch while being bumped out of your spot, because you're not going to get to every spot every single time, right? And he's got to be able to get simultaneously. It's a tough task. This is the hardest part of developing as a finisher, is keeping the acrobatic elements and just dancing around guys while also being comfortable taking the hit. Like, it's a really delicate thing to balance, and he's going to have to learn that.
Now, some of the volume of any 2-point number at Bama goes back to what we said right at the beginning. That's why I wanted to put all this in there. It's like they led the nation in threes by a lot, and I have it up. I could just look 132nd in 2-point attempts, right? Like I'm not going to be like, oh, this is all Brandon Miller's fault. Like they want to play that way. It's going to impact his numbers too. But in general, even with the chances, you can see that rim volume, not necessarily his thing. An in between game is a lazy term people use, and I'm going to use it here, but just like when you can't get to the rim and your three is cut off, what are you going to do? How are you going to create an advantage for your team? I don't think he's a bad passer, but I don't think he's an advantage creating passer either, especially in pick and rolls. Like very rarely was I like, oh, wow, he created that shot in that situation. And so a lot of it with him is just like if the shot's cut off, he's just throwing it to one of their point guards, whoever is out there, and letting them do it, which is fine. You're not making a mistake that way. Like his turnover rate was solidly low for a guy who had as high of usage as him. But I didn't feel like between the no mid-range and the not a lack, that's the wrong word, but like he didn't create the passing advantages very much. Like the lazy word in between game is just like, what are you going to be at the pro level if the scoring isn't awesome? And I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, for me with his defense, or excuse me, not defense, his decision making as a passer, that kind of threw me that was a red flag for me, where I'd see him just make absolutely wrong reads, and it kind of bugged me, especially like in March. I don't know if that was the injury impacting him, just saying, dang, normally I would do this, but now I have to settle. But with his passing, again, decision making is, I think, going to be a big thing. He has a good feel, but just executing on what he sees. As a self creator, I think he's got moves. He has counters, things like that. Is it high level enough though to be like, that's going to be what separates him, I think, as a star, is will he be able to create with both hands, both directions, any direction really, straight, left, right, backwards, even like all that stuff. I mean, is he going to be able to do that at a high enough level consistently to be unpredictable? Hard to say. I think yes, for the most part. It's just at what capacity.
Even I say this with a lot of prospects, like even just a floater would go a long way in allowing him to be that, right?
Yeah, and I mean I'm trying to pull up the numbers. He didn't shoot very well on floaters. 31st percentile, 12 of 37 for the year, so just under 33%.
Yeah, I bring up this example a lot around draft time, but like that was helpful for Karis LeVert. I felt like when he he took too many once he got good at them, but when he developed a floater, it helped him a lot because he wasn't a great shooter, so he would have a little too much space. When he'd get in the lane, people were ready for him. Once he had the floater, he could get more to the rim. It actually helped him because guys had to be conscious of that shot. Now, again, he took too many floaters, but having it in the bag still is helpful when you get kind of within 12 feet, just because defenders know that something could be coming. Let's talk a little bit about his Pacers specific fit, because this is a Pacers podcast after all. But before we do that, the big elephant in the room that probably should have been addressed before the 20-minute mark. Look, Brandon Miller was the driver of a car that was potentially involved, not even potentially, that was involved in a murder, right? And there's been a lot of statements from his lawyers and police about his involvement and what he can't be charged with. And look, I don't know the law. I don't know what happened besides I can read what everybody else reads. So the character part of this is something that every NBA team will have to diligently study. I've never talked to Brandon Miller in my life. I have no idea what to make of any of that. It is certainly concerning to me that it happened and that he was the driver of the car, but I can't make anything of it without knowing more of that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I think that has to be a giant consideration for every NBA team in his interview process, non-basketball division. Like I can watch him play and talk about that, but the team part of studying him will be more important than any other prospect. 100%.
Yes, and correct. I think I echo everything you said. We can't speak on what we don't know, right? And for NBA teams, they're going to have to kind of ask the uncomfortable questions, not in a prosecutor way or something like they're in the courtroom, but you got to ask. I mean, hey, what's like the status with all of it? You kind of just got to dissect it and say, like, make sure from your accounts, and obviously you're getting to ask Brandon Miller himself all these questions. So I think that's going to help shape the situation one way or the other. Ultimately, all indications have said It's not going to impact his draft stock. That's generally what the agreement is. There's a reason he's still being thrown in at number 2 by both ESPN and The Ringer. I mean, they have sources on those situations, and they've cleared that, I'm sure. So I think generally what's going to happen, he'll be cleared, but NBA teams will press him a lot. And it may be the difference of taking him second, third, or fourth at worst.
If the Pacers do jump up to the top 4 and have a chance at picking him, that is a massive part of studying who he is and what he would mean to their team. From a basketball perspective, the part I can see and can dig into more of, he's a pretty good fit with any team that already has that creator, like you said earlier, right? Like Detroit, I think he'd fit really well too with Cade and Ivy. Like he'd be really good fit with the Pistons. The thing about the Pacers specifically is like Mathurin is similar to him in that they're not great passers despite being great scorers. So I'd be curious how those two would mesh. But in terms of with the Pacers' premier talent, Tyrese Halliburton, I think Brandon Miller would be a really good fit there in terms of he can play in transition where the Pacers are at their best. He can shoot the 3, which is great. And he can defend on the wing, which the Pacers absolutely desperately need as a skill set on their team.
Yeah, I remember. It's funny, actually. You had said about the Bulls always comes to the mind. I vividly remember watching a game. I want to say it was like early February or something, Pacers Bulls. All I know is they came back. It was a big win. And I remember going, dang, this team needs perimeter defense badly. It's funny that we keep coming back to the Bulls, but
the Chicago Bulls, baby, let's go.
It's weird. You never hear about wings being staggered off of each other, especially like shooting wings. You're like, oh, they can coexist. This might be a one situation where you have to, we hear about it. One prime example has always been the Harden and Russell Westbrook, or excuse me, Chris Paul Rockets back in like 2018 or whenever it was, where it was like, all right, they'll start and close games together. Everything else, one of them will always be on the court together. You might have that exact same situation, but on the wings, which again, very unique, given that wings generally can coexist much more easily when they have overlapping skills. It's probably the easiest one to do. But this might be not be a situation where I think you can always have one on the court, which is good. How will they fit together on court is a big question mark because they have so many similarities.
Yeah, look, Pacers are too familiar with Sabonis and Turner even, right? If you want to talk about, they have totally unique skill sets, those two do, but like there was a lot of talk about how much can they be together with one of them on the court at all times. But yeah, I don't like Mathurin's played 1 year in the NBA. Like I'm not going to bury the Miller Mathurin fit when they're not even on the same team, but they are both really good scorers. They can both wiggle their way open from deep. They can make it happen. Mathurin's a little better closer to the basket and gets the line. Miller's a better shooter. But if they both aren't good secondary creators, like if they're in a lineup with Halliburton, it's just like, hey, Tyrese, pass everybody open. And if you pass and you can't get the ball back, like that guy's got to shoot. That's fine. I think that fit is fine. I just would be curious what that would look like long term and where does Andrew Nembhard fit into this. This is a little too niche. Like they have never played together. And I think Brandon Miller is an excellent fit with the Pacers in general from a basketball perspective. I'm just curious about the Mathurin part specifically. And it's like, I don't want to say that the Pacers like are going to have low volume opportunities for whoever they draft, but it seems like if Mathurin's a starter on day one and they still have Halliburton and Miles Turner still on their team, like even if you get picked 4th or 3rd, like you're probably the 4th option in the Pacers starting 5. So right away, anyone could totally exceed that as their career progresses. But it's just like your skill set fitting into that role is almost as important as what you can grow into. And that's why I think Miller's a good fit, because we've talked about a lot of the complementary skills that he has, especially as a 3-point shooter and defender.
Yeah. I mean, just when you can have that highest level of complementary guys next to you and you have multiple of them, like that's the stuff that is a ceiling raiser, I think, for teams. And, if it becomes an issue where you have to pay one or the other, you trade them. I mean, we've seen this happen multiple times. You hope you pick the right team, the right player, but like you don't want to end up in Oklahoma City's situation, for example, where you choose Serge Ibaka over James Harden, but unless it comes down to like that much is on the line, I can't see even that situation coming up unless they hate each other and it's like, all right, it's me or him. What are you going to do? I don't see it. But if it does, I mean, it's an okay problem to have because you'll still get positive equity for him,
Yeah, sometimes too, it's like with how fast NBA rosters change. I'm like, why am I projecting how this guy's going to fit with the team 4 years from now? And like Halliburton, yeah, I'll pen him in, right? Mathurin, yeah, I'll pen him in. That's it. Like everyone else, I don't know. No one else even has more than 3 years left on their deal. Like, I don't know. So yeah, talking about his fit with those two players specifically, I think is kind of more important than any other thing about the Pacers, because that's kind of the only thing you know. And Andrew Nembhard probably as well is just like nailed down for that long. And I did this in the past a lot. Like when the TJ Leaf pick, when they I think it was 18 in 2018, I was like, well, how would he fit with Sabonis and this guy and this guy and this guy? And it's like 2 years later, it's like Collison's gone, Bogdanovich is gone, Thad Young's gone. It's like if you're drafting based on how they fit with your current team, that's stupid. Like build it out with the stars. So that's why with Miller, the focus is on Mathurin and Halliburton and Nembhard, and should be with every prospect. And I think he'd fit really well with them. And the hang up I would have is how do him and Mathurin coexist? Because in general, it'd be a pretty good fit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something only time will tell if it does. If Indiana does get up in the lottery or in the top 4, but I would say if I had
is there wood around you? You have to knock on it. That is.
Oh yeah. I'm recording on wood, so yeah. No, I just knocked it for you. Don't worry. As long as it doesn't mean the Mavs get in one of two situations. The Mavs can't lose their pick, and the Bulls cannot jump up, because then not only do the Mavs lose their pick, but also the Magic don't get 2 picks. And I'm saying that as I'm wearing an Orlando Magic shirt. So my prediction though is like if Brandon Miller goes to the Pacers, I mean, I think ultimately you're looking at a guy who not only helps win right now, he probably elevates you to a playoff status. I don't think that's a bold take whatsoever. Yep. But on top of that, long term, you do get you have 2 outcomes. You get one of the best complementary pieces in the league, and then you have 2 of them possibly in him and Mathurin, or both he and Mathurin, or one of the other pops, and you have some trade assets to grow from it, and you have some good early value as well. It's almost a best of both worlds, and like you said, an ever so changing league of roster construction.
And hey, the Pacers need wings, and he's a wing. Like the lowest level, that is extremely significant in this whole discussion. It's just like they need someone at that size. And if he's going to be a complimentary player, maybe he can be more than that. Maybe he can be a star level, have the ball in his hands kind of guy. But just like if they want to, the Pacers have said like 45 wins. They're thinking about it next year. Like the postseason's the goal. Like having a good complimentary player, even if it's a rookie who's just making threes, like that's good right away too. So a lot of fit things that I like, and I'm pretty intrigued by his fit. And I have nothing else to add on Brandon Miller unless you do.
That's it for me. I think we tackled him pretty well.
He's a good player. The top of this draft is so good.
One last thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I soured on this draft around December and January, and then middle of January, my God, it just took off. I mean, there's guys who I'm like, wait, this is a top 15 prospect. And then I look at my board, I'm like, I have from 27. And I just don't understand how guys will withdraw, because next year's class, I mean, it's hard to tell a year in advance, but it's very easy to tell in a year in advance. Next draft is a drop off. We've been spoiled by the last few, and there's a drop off. Some of these guys will return. So the draft may, it's tough right now. It's a very heavy class. It may weaken a little bit, but it's still going to be strong even if that happens.
I was selfishly, as a Hoosier fan, hoping that Jalen Hood-Schifino would think, hey, I could be a top 10 guy next year, but he's going to stay. He's going to be a first round pick. So good for him. He deserves it. He's a good player. Looking forward to the lottery coming up. That is the next show here on Locked On Pacers, previewing the lottery, the Pacers odds, everything you need to know, the stuff they're rooting for that isn't themselves jumping up. Go Western Conference teams, go if you're the Pacers and you personally don't move up. We'll get to all that. And of course, I'll be at the Combine this week, so lots of draft stuff coming your way here on Locked On Pacers. Thank you guys a ton for listening. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.